All right. So now what we're going to do is we're going to talk about the phases of training. The phases of training, all training for this type of endurance type of thing is going to focus on the big race. You're going to go backwards from the big race because your big race is where you want to finish. So if you know the date of your big race, you're going to go backwards and you're going to go usually 2 weeks earlier. You're going to end your coordination phase. The coordination phase is going to last 3 weeks. Then you're going to go backwards to say, all right, at the beginning of the coordination phase, that means 7 weeks before that is speed development. And then everything else between today and whatever that 7 week starting point for your speed development phase, that's all going to be base train phase. Okay, so that could be 3 months long as a minimum, or it could be 6, 9, 12 months long. If you know that your big race is the Olympics and you are the person who this year is going, everything's going well. Oh, they moved Tokyo from 2020 to 2021. Okay, so now instead of having a base phase that's going to be, say, 3 months, now you've got a base phase that's 15 months because they moved the whole Olympics a year away. All right, so you always go backwards from the big race and you do all your calculations backwards. But we're going to start from the base phase because that's where we're going to start our training. What the base phase is it's trying to generate the biggest aerobic engine that you can possibly do. So you're going to increase your aerobic capacity to the maximal extent possible. And what you're going to use is you're going to use predominantly easy runs. The idea here is that you're going to maximize metabolic stress while minimizing mechanical stress. You have to balance these two stresses in order to optimize performance, to keep that runner healthy. The other thing that you're going to do is you're going to lift 3 times a week after you run, only legs. We're not lifting our upper body because we're going to assume that this is a strut endurance athlete who's going to have to carry that upper body. So we're lifting after we're going to do these long workouts, because when we lift after, what we're going to do is we're going to decrease some of the plyometric stiffness that we've accumulated after the run. We're going to get a greater stimulus on PGC1 alpha, and we're going to also, we're going to get something that I can't remember. So we're going to get the increase in PGC1 alpha. You're going to decrease injury likelihood because you're going to break some of the crosslinks, and because we're lifting afterwards, what we're going to do is we're going to minimize, by having maximal metabolic stress when we lift, we're going to minimize the strength adaptation or the muscle size adaptation. So we're going to lift heavy, and we're not going to lift all the way to failure. We're going to lift heavy, and we're going to lift until we slow somewhat, but not until positive failure, because we don't want to maximize growth. All right, so what are we doing in the base phase? We're doing lots of aerobic, lots of distance, lots of long runs, and we're doing predominantly those longer runs, and we're going to do them where we're going to try and maximize metabolic stress, and we're going to talk about how we do that over this series of videos. When you get about 12 weeks out from your competition, that's when you're going to start your specific preparation phase. Specific preparation is a 10-week period in which you're going to now take that huge aerobic energy or engine that you've developed in your base phase, and now you're going to bring in the speed work. You're going to start to increase the speed at which you can do stuff. So in the first part of the specific preparation phase, this is what we call speed development phase. This is training your lactate threshold. So remember, when we're training our lactate threshold, we're going to do high intensity and sprint interval training. Yes, we're still going to use the polarized training component, but we're now going to have built up in our base phase, we're going to be doing a lot of miles, so that by the time we get to our specific preparation phase, as we increase the number of high intensity miles, now we're still going to be able to get a good amount of lactate threshold work, where we're going to be doing lots of high intensity interval and lots of sprint interval training. The base phase, we're not going to do as much high intensity or sprint interval training. We're really trying to do this as long, slow endurance. All right, for the lactate threshold work, we're going to do most of that work at or above lactate threshold. and that's going to be our high intensity intervals. So that's 2 to 4 minutes, and our sprint intervals. That's going to be our 30 seconds or below. Remember, so the only time that we really are going to do anything more than that, we're going to do longer sessions, is if we're training, if our big race is a marathon, we need to practice running at that high intensity for a long period of time. So you're going to do what are called tempo runs, as well as high intensities and sprint intervals. The tempo run is a long session, or it's a longer period of running, when you're going to try and maintain at or above your race pace. Okay, we tend to do that in the middle of a long run. So we'll do a long, slow run to kind of deplete our energy stores. And then we're going to bring in a tempo run for the second half, or the second part of that run. And that means that we're going at a high intensity and we're getting used to running fast at that fatigue level. Again, you're going to lift 2 to 3 times per week. At the early point, when you just start your speed development, you're still lifting 3 times a week. By the end of those 7 weeks, you're down to twice a week. So you're just slowly progressing and decreasing the heavy lifting, because now we're trying to, yes, do enough so that we can decrease injury rate, but we're also trying to do not too much so that we can increase our performance. The coordination phase is the last 3 weeks of specific preparation. This is, remember, if you go back to the plyometric training paper, we saw that plyometric training is going to increase performance, and it's going to increase performance within 1 to 3 weeks. So we don't have to go for a long period of time here. This, we're focusing on increasing the economy of our movement. So now we're going to do plyometric training. We're going to do a lot of racing, but it's not really racing to win, it's racing to train. So we're going to get into races that are faster than the race we want to do. So if we're running a marathon, we're going to get into 10Ks, we're going to get into half marathons. We're going to go back and forth between those things. And we might even come down and drop down and do a 5K, so that we're really going a lot faster than what we're expecting to compete at. Because now what we're doing is we're increasing our turnover, we're getting that economical movement, we're doing more plyometric training. The risk of injury is coming up, but our stiffness is going to be something that's going to help us compete at a high level in the big race. And that's going to be really important. The other thing is we're shifting down to only lifting once a week. So now we've gone from 3 to 2 over that specific speed development phase, and now we're going to 1 day a week over the coordination phase. It's just enough to keep us from getting injured, okay? Also, during the specific preparation phase, this is when we're going to try and, if we need to drop weight to get to our race weight, that's what we're going to do. We're going to start that at 10 weeks, and we're going to start to slowly drop weight over time. You don't have to do much because you're doing this high volume of work, but that's the time to do it. It's also the time to come with beta-alanine, because beta-alanine takes that 10 weeks. All right. Early in the speed development phase, before we get the beta-alanine in, you might want to do some bicarb-based training. All right. Competition phase, that's going to be our 2 weeks where we're going to really start to focus in for the race. What that means is we're going to taper. So we're going to decrease our overall volume, but maintain the intensity of training. Because as we decrease the volume, that means the mechanical stress on our body is going down. The metabolic stress on our body is we're going to keep it high by doing high intensity work, but that means that we're going to be much, much fresher. We're going to have lots of energy on the day of the big race. Okay? You can continue to race over about a 6-week period, but as you're racing, because you're tapering down, you're doing less, but you're doing higher intensity training, what you're going to do is you're going to lose some of your aerobic base. That's why you can't stay in the competition phase for a long period of time. After you're done your big race, you're going to have at least a couple of weeks where you're just going to have a recovery phase where you're going to just jog a few miles. You're going to try and regain that mental freshness that you're going to need to perform at a high level. All right, so what does it look like? Again, this is Trent Stellenwerf's wife's work. So Trent is the author of the paper that we're going to look at today. This is his wife's training. She was a 2-time Olympic 1,500 meters runner for Canada. And you can see that her weekly kilometers per week is about 120 kilometers per week. So that's just under 100 miles, about 80 miles a week. That's what she's looking at for most of these weeks. Then you can see when she's in her base phase, she's going out that kind of 80-ish miles a week. And the intensity is between 80 and 100%. She'll drop down and have some breaks throughout where she's doing rest and recovery weeks, but you can see that here we're going to start with, say, a 70% intensity at a good long volume. You slowly build that up, and then you get a rest recovery as you get closer to that 100%, and then you slowly build that up again until you get into the specific preparation phase. Specific preparation, you can see the volume is coming down, the intensity is staying up, and towards the end, this is when we're getting into that kind of coordination phase where we're increasing the intensity, we're doing much more plyometric, we're doing much more racing, volume is coming down, and then you can see the competition phase. What happens is we're dropping the volume even more, and the first competition for her was the Canadian National Championships. That was where her intensity was the highest, her volume was the lowest. She's then going to recover. She's going to have another racing week here at the Pan American Games. And then she's got the World Championships here where she tries to increase and re-peak for it. So she increases, she tapers. This is her most important race. That's why she's tapering the furthest. Okay? So that's how you would put it together. And now we're going to talk about how we would support all of these things with our nutrition and other aspects.